Hi guys, and welcome back to a new video for Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis. In today's video we're going to be looking at the most recent quest that was added to the game, which is the Leciel Exploration quest. So this is, in the NGS headlines, the quest that was shown off as the randomly generated quest that was designed to be ran over and over again. So what I'm going to do today is just do a quick breakdown of the quest now that I've done it a few times. Just to roughly run through how the quest works and the different mechanics that are involved with it, and some tips on how to have like a better success rate overall as well. So first thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at the basic overview of the quest, so what you need to do to actually do the quest in general. Then we're going to cover some of the elements such as the different map sectors and the different objectives that will be required, and then we're going to cover what happens once you get to the end of the stage as well. So first place to start it off is what exactly is the Leciel Exploration quest. So this is accessible by any quest counter, and it takes place in the floating island Leciel, which is the thing you can see flying in the air above all of the regions in NGS. Now, the requirement to do this quest is you need a battle power of 3,615 or higher, which is actually quite difficult to get. So what you will probably need for that is you'll likely need to have limit breaked weapons and armor with high level augments on them, and you will probably need potentials to be quite high levels as well. And it should go without saying, but you'll probably need to be level 75 on your main class and a higher level in your subclass as well. Although I don't think subclass actually affects your battle power too much. But it is quite a difficult requirement to get to. Just for context, my force that I use for this, she uses a fully potential Neos-Astraean rod with 6 abilities on it. It's ground to about 64, and then she's also got limit breaked armors as well, and that gets her just above the requirement, so it is quite a lot of work to get the requirement to be able to run this. You can use any class you want for it, and the way it works is it is a 8-player quest. So you can run it on your own if you want to, but it is ideally designed for 8 players, although there are things that change depending on the number of players that you actually run it with. So the big draw with this quest is that there is a random element to it. So the way the quest works is when you spawn into the map, you'll notice that the map is shaped like it's a large square, and it's intersected with lots of little square rooms with corridors between them. Each of those rooms will have a different trial in it essentially, and these trials can be a variety of different things. What you want to be doing is, once the quest starts, you'll have a time limit, which if you use 8 players, it will be, I believe it's about 5 or 6 minute time limit. It is quite short, possibly 8 minutes at most. Can't remember the exact timing, but I know that if you run it with 1 player, you do get more time. What you want to be doing in the time that you've got, you want to be running around the rooms and completing the objectives in each room. What this will do is, each objective will actually give all the players in your party a special buff. When you start the quest, there will be a little legend underneath the map that you can compare the actual map as well. So when you look at the map for the Leciel quest, you'll notice that each part of the map has a number in a room. The numbers are between 1 to 5, and there'll also be one room that has a star as well. And under that, under the map, there'll be a legend that shows you what those numbers represent. So, for example, in this one that I did recently, you can see that all of the rooms with number 1 on them will give you attack potency to destructible parts up. So what that means is that when you're attacking a part that's breakable on an enemy, you'll get an attack buff. You can see that, for example, number 4, if you do a room that has a number 4 on it, you'll get a PP recovery amount buff. So what you want to be doing is prioritising the buffs that are most important. Some of them are really not very useful, some of them are incredibly useful. So in this one here, I would say that the attack potency buff to destructible part is really, really useful to get, because it's just more attack that'll help kill the boss faster. Obviously, PA and technique potency up is really useful. Damage resistance would be useful to an extent, but you will find that a lot of the bosses in this will hit really, really hard, so there is a limit to how much it helps. PP recovery will help some classes more than others, and PP recovery every 30 attacks landed. will only help certain classes that attack quickly. You can also see that, as I mentioned earlier, one of the rooms will have a star on it, and the star gives you a unique skill that you can only get once in that run. So in this one, it gives us attack speed, so you'll just attack faster. And again, the star rooms can be a variety of different abilities. So I mentioned previously that there is a random element to the quest, so this affects a few different elements of the quest. The first thing it actually randomizes is those abilities. So typically what you'll find is that the abilities and the boss at the end of the quest will roll over. I believe it's every day that it rolls over, but I may be wrong on that. It seems to be roughly every 24 hours that it changes. The actual map layout will change slightly as well, so you will find that some rooms might not have a corridor on every side of them, and then that might change for the next layout that you do, so it will be slightly different. And the objectives in each room will change each time as well. So there's a couple of different types of objectives in each room. When you walk into a room, it'll show you like a pop-up message on the screen that tells you what the objective is for that room, and if you clear that objective, you will unlock that buff that corresponds to that room. So just to make it easy for people, so if you look at the map and you see a room, for example, that has a number 3 in it, you compare it to your legend, and your legend will say number 3 is damage resistance up. That means then if you walk into that room and the objective is defeat all of the enemies, then by defeating all of those enemies, you will get a damage resistance up buff. That's basically the way it works. So during the first stage, which is where you're running around the map, you want to be collecting as many of the important buffs as you can. There are a variety of different ways to do it. I would recommend that for different kinds of rooms, you probably want a different amount of people going to them. So the rooms in this quest are generally split up into combat-themed ones and puzzle-themed ones. So what I'll do is in the next section, I'll cover the different types of rooms that you can get. It won't necessarily cover all of them, but just give you an idea of the kind of rooms that you can run into. So the first type of room that you're going to run into quite often is combat-themed rooms. So combat-themed rooms, really simple. The most simple of them all is you'll run into the room and it will say defeat all the enemies. A load of enemies will spawn in the room, and all you need to do is just kill them all, and you'll get the buff for clearing that room. There are also ones, there are ones where enemies appear in puzzle rooms as well, and you might have to defeat them in there as well. But generally, the defeat enemies rooms will just be a load of enemies to defeat. There are some different varieties, so some of them will be really simple. So there are some rooms where you will just walk in and a load of enemies will spawn. There are some where you'll walk in and there might be things like buff drafters in the room, and the enemies might spawn on platforms above you. There are ones occasionally where you have to use I can't remember what they're called now, but it's the aerial bounce pads that you can use. That's the ones that appear in Noise and Plant, where you can do like a jump attack off them to do increased damage. There are ones that have those in where you have to bounce up to where the enemies are. So there is a few different variants of those rooms, but they all have the same overall rule, which is just defeat all of the enemies. The next ones that appear are there's various different types of puzzle rooms. So for puzzle rooms, usually I would recommend you probably only want 1 or 2 people going after a puzzle room, because you want as many people as possible going after the combat rooms just to help clear them faster. Because what I've found in this quest is that the enemies are very tanky. They're all level 75 and they seem to have loads of health, so it does help a lot to have quite a few people attacking the enemies. While most of the team is going after the enemies, then 1 or 2 other people can go around and clean up some of the puzzle rooms. So there's a few different types of puzzle rooms that I've seen. So there's one where you enter the room and you have to activate 3 pull switches. There's just 3 switches you have to go and press, which sounds really easy. Generally in these rooms, the pull switches will be hidden quite well. So there might be like really awkward terrain and you have to try and find where they are in the terrain. They're generally hidden quite well out of sight. In those rooms, your mag's active sonar will actually work and will actually give you a rough idea of the direction that the switches are in. One of the switches in those rooms as well will also always have a force field around it, and that one, when you go near it, will spawn a couple of enemies, and you have to defeat those enemies to then unlock that switch. And again, by pressing the 3 switches, you'll get the buff for that room. There are also switch puzzles where the switches are on the floor. So these ones, the way they typically work is you'll usually have a pattern on the wall and a load of switches on the floor in front of it, and you basically have to match the pattern on the wall to the switches. So the pattern on the wall will show a number of switches lit up in different colours, and it basically have to stand on all the switches and match the pattern that's on the wall. And there'll be a pole switch that you can press to reset it all if you get it wrong. As soon as you match it all up, you'll get the buff for the room. There is other puzzle rooms as well. So there's another one that shows up quite often, which is when you walk in, there'll be what I can only describe as like a zoo enclosure, and it has a load of the like native life from Halfa. Generally then above it, you'll have some platforms and there'll be a dice on the wall that has a number showing on it. What you have to do then is, next to the dice, there will be a couple of, again, these like clear boxes that have various life forms in them. And what you have to do is look at the number that's on the dice, go down to the bottom floor into the large enclosure where all the animals are. And you have to count which species of tames matches the number that's on the dice. So as an example, say if the dice asks you for a number 4, you go down to the enclosure at the bottom and you might see, for example, there might be 3 moonies, there might be a few of the pats, say there might be 2 pats, and then there's 4 of the larger birds. So in that case, you would then go up to the top floor where the larger bird is and press the switch in front of the larger bird, and that would complete that room. Occasionally you will have multiple dice as well, just to complicate matters a bit more. So you might have a 3 and a 5, and that means then you have to match the tames that have 3 in the large enclosure and the tames that have 5 in the large enclosure as well. It's kind of difficult to explain, but you might see it in a couple of these videos. Just for these videos that are playing in the background, they're just a couple of the runs I've done recently, just to give you a rough idea of how it looks in motion. But essentially, look at the number on the dice, go down to the main enclosure, look at the number of the tames that are in the enclosure, and match the tame to the number that's on the dice. And that will unlock that room and give you the buff for it. So it can take a little bit of a while to do that one, particularly if there's multiple dice. But essentially what you want to do is look at the buffs that the rooms are giving you and decide if it's worth doing. So if that tames puzzle room is going to give you like a really nice attack buff, then it's probably worth doing. If it's only going to give you an inconsequential buff that you don't think is going to help much, then probably skip it and go to a different room. So that's kind of a rundown of how most puzzles work. There might be 1 or 2 more that I'm forgetting at the moment, but generally they're fairly self-explanatory for the most part. Just to reiterate though, you do not want your whole team going after the puzzle rooms. You want 1 or 2 people at the most. For the pole switch one, I could see maybe 2 people, just to quickly search the room to find the pole switches a bit quicker. And potentially for the tames one as well, although there is a potential to mess it up if someone miscounts. Yeah, generally you want most people going after the combat zones. So that's roughly how the puzzle zones work. So the next thing I'm going to briefly cover is another little mechanic that happens in some of the rooms, which is trap rooms. So if you look at the map that I'm going to show here, if you look at the number 3 sector that's just to the southwest of the center room, you can see that around it is like an orange dotted line. And there's also another one towards the top right, the number 5 room. You can see there's like an orange line that goes around those rooms. What that represents is that there is a trap in that room. These rooms, they're risk reward basically. So by completing the trial in those rooms, you'll quite often get extra capsules at the end of the room, which will give you further buffs. So they are really worth doing. But as soon as someone walks in the room, it will put these laser walls up around the room and lock that person in. What it will do then is, on the walls, there will be a little core you can break. It's kind of similar to the tower defense quests, the tower defense urgent quests, where you get the walls that you have to break with a core on them. Those will surround the room, and the other players would have to break the core to let the player out. Occasionally it will also put a bomb in the room as well, and if you don't clear the room fast enough, it'll explode and kill the player that's inside. So they are kind of risk reward. I would generally only recommend doing those if the buff is really good. or if you've got plenty of time left and you can afford to do it, because they do waste quite a lot of time, particularly trying to get into the room to to break the player out. The cores that are on the walls actually have a lot of health, so they are quite hard to break down. So that's the trap rooms. But as I say, you do also get bonuses from those rooms as well. So the next thing I want to quickly cover is what happens a little bit into this first section. So when there's 3 minutes left, you'll get an emergency trial notification and a thunderstorm will start. What this does is it will target random areas of the map with thunder that will detonate, and it creates like a huge dome of lightning that'll do damage over time, and it does hit quite hard as well, so you really don't want to get caught up by it. At the same time, a Gigantix will spawn in one of the rooms, and it'll be designated on the map by the typical trial icon that you see in any other quest. By defeating that Gigantix, you'll unlock an extra buff, so you do get a bonus buff for doing it, and you'll also cancel the thunderstorm out as well. So what you'll find quite often is that people will go for the Gigantix and get rid of it. Usually by that point anyway, in an 8-player quest, you've normally gathered quite a few buffs anyway, so it's kind of inconsequential going for the others, so you may as well go for the Gigantix. But by defeating that Gigantix, you will get an extra buff, and also the thunderstorm will stop as well. And that will happen every single run. That's one constant that happens every single time. Now, I don't know if the Gigantix will rotate to different monsters or not. Every time I've done it recently, it's always been a Fortos launcher, but it may change because there is quite a lot of random elements to this quest. I should note on this as well that the enemies in the quest are also randomized as well, so every time you do a run, well, I think it might be every day that you do a run, the predominant type of enemies in the quest will change. So I know every time I've done it recently, it's been mainly dolls. You will also get special enemies in the quest as well, which are called, I can't know if it's Aberrant or something similar, but it's a prefix that gets added to a few of the enemies in the run. It's usually the starless enemies, and those special enemies will also get a special buff as well. So they can be quite nasty actually. So I have seen buffs for the enemies such as, I've had it where the starless can inflict Gelin and Zalur on you with every single attack. I've had it where they can siphon health from you, or siphon PP from you. I've also had it as well where they can inflict injury status on you as well, which is where you lose a portion of your maximum health and you can't heal it back. So you do want to watch out for those. When you start the quest, it will explain what the enemy buff is as well. And that enemy buff will also generally apply to the boss enemy at the end. So next stage is what happens once the time runs out. So once the time runs out, the quest doesn't actually end. What will happen then is you'll get transported to a boss arena. This boss that you fight at the end will be massively buffed, so it'll have all of the enemy buffs, it'll have a lot of health, and it will have a lot of mechanics depending on the run. Again, a lot of the boss mechanics will change every day as well. So examples I've seen are, I mentioned the Gelin and Zalur that some of the enemies can do. So I fought a couple of days ago, I believe it was, I fought, it was a Dark Ragnar, which every attack it hit you with inflicted Gelin and Zalur, and it also had like a nuke attack it did once it got to a certain amount of health that would just delete like 75% of your HP, and you just wouldn't get it back. So you had to fight the rest of the fight with 25% health. You couldn't heal back up to full health or anything. And it would also Gelin and Zalur you as well. I've also fought an Ikas Abujin, which confused you with every single attack it did. That was absolutely infuriating. I've also recently had one where there was a Dark Ragnar which had a thing called a Bombzard. So there are some special mechanics that seem to only apply to this quest. So they do explain this in the tutorials when you first start the quest, but in particular there's one called a Bombzard, and what it does is, in certain situations, this Bombzard will become active on the boss, and if it's not destroyed when it becomes active, it will detonate, and it does round about 3,000 damage to everyone. So I've only had this appear on Dark Ragnar so far, and the way it works with that is that it seems that every interaction that causes Dark Ragnar to fall over will trigger the Bombzard to activate. So every time you break one of Ragnar's legs and make it collapse, the Bombzard will activate. So you want to then destroy the Bombzard. Normally you would attack the core on Ragnar's back, but with this one you want to attack the Bombzard instead, otherwise the Bombzard will detonate and kill you all. It also seems to trigger whenever it gets an elemental down as well. So I was playing Force recently and I inflicted it with the fire elemental down and the Bombzard activated. So you do need to be aware of that. It looks like a big golden cube generally when it's activated, and on Ragnar it usually appears near Ragnar's head. I haven't seen any of the bosses yet, so I don't know how it interacts with those, but it's something definitely to be aware of. Again, you will be aware of this at the start of the quest. It will show you what buffs the boss has. They can be really, really nasty buffs though. So the Dark Ragnar, for example, had the Bombzard, and also had an ability where it had 400% potency, so all of its attacks were doing 400% damage. So you do need to watch out, which is why it's so imperative to try and get as many of the good buffs as you can in that first stage, because you need all the help you can get to survive against the boss attacks in the second stage. So how the actual boss works is the rewards for the quest are based on, it seems to be based on a combination of how many trials you complete during the first stage and how far you progress on the boss in the second stage. It may even just be the boss, I'm not 100% sure yet. Basically, for every 25% of the boss's health that you get rid of, you will upgrade the rewards that you get for the end of the quest. So you want to try and, I mean, ideally you want to try and kill the boss, but if you can't kill it, at least try and kill 75% of it. Just a quick note as well, don't worry if you don't kill the boss, you won't fail the quest. What will happen is you'll just get rewards based on how much damage you did to the boss, so don't think you actually fail it necessarily. The way the failure system works in this game, in this quest, is you'll fail if you either run out of time on the actual boss, because the boss is a timed fight as well. I believe you have about 2.5 or 3 minutes to kill the boss. Again, that will probably scale depending on the number of players. So if you run out of time, the quest will just end, and you'll get rewards based on how much of the boss health bar you got through. The other thing is, during the entire quest, not just the boss, there is a life point counter. And again, I don't know if this scales based on number of players, but for the full 8 players, you have 12 lives essentially. So every time someone dies, you'll lose 1 life. And when you get to 0 lives, the quest will end. Now, I don't know what happens if you lose all 12 lives before the boss. I've never actually had that happen, because I think you have to have a really awful party for that to happen. But I don't know if you just fail the quest in that instance because you didn't even get to the boss, or if you could just get really poor rewards. But usually what will happen if you do fail, it'll usually be on the boss that you lose all your lives. You'll get rewards based on how much health damage you did to it. So lastly, I just want to cover a couple of little tips and tricks for the quest really that I've picked up in the few runs I've done of it. So in these videos that have been playing in the background, you probably pick up on a few mistakes that I make during these. These were a few of my first runs that I did, so I was still getting used to the quest, and there is a few mess ups that I make. So one mistake I did make early on is trying to solo too much of the rooms, particularly the defeat enemies rooms. Quite often there'll be a lot of enemies. As I've said previously, they'll have 75, and some of them can have really big buffs as well, particularly if there's a lot of starless enemies in there. So don't be afraid to sort of follow the pack and help group out rather than trying to solo some of the things on your own. You might think it's better to try and split off and try and get more buffs over the time, but quite often what you'll find is you'll take so long to complete one of the rooms that you're just slowing the team down overall. So unless you're really, really confident in defeating the enemies, I would probably recommend sticking with the majority of the pack if you're going after the enemy rooms. Again, as I've mentioned before, try not to have too many people focused on the puzzle rooms. Generally 1 or 2 people just going around clearing those is fine. They'll rack up the buffs fast for you, and they won't have too much of a detriment on the overall combat, because at least they're actually clearing rooms. Another thing you might see me, there's a mistake I do make in one of the runs where I attack Ragnar's core when it's down, and this was total my bad. I totally forgot that Ragnar had a Bombzard attached to it, and as a result the Bombzard detonated and wiped a few people. So just be aware, just make sure you read the buffs that the boss has before you start the quest, so you're familiar with what it's going to do, because it will massively change the fight. But just be aware of that before you go in. The other thing is, don't try and just clear every room as well. I've seen 1 or 2 parties where they literally just try and move room to room and clear everything. First of all, you just don't really have time to clear the whole map unless you're an absolutely amazing party. Second of all, some of the buffs honestly are just not worth going for, and you generally want to try and stack up some of the better buffs. So if, for example, you have an attack potency buff on room number 1, there'll be a couple of number 1s on the map usually. So it's better to just go for those number 1 rooms first and just stack up that attack potency buff so that you've got a really nice buff going into the boss, then look at something else. The way the quest is, it actually does remind me a little bit of PSO in this instance, because when you walk into a room, when you go into the next room, the enemies from the previous room won't follow you in. They're restricted to their own rooms. So don't be afraid about running through a room with enemies. Just be aware that if you are just running through rooms to get somewhere, make sure you keep an eye on the map, because the last thing you want to do is run into one of those trap rooms and get trapped in. I've seen that happen to 1 or 2 people where they've obviously not looked at their map and they've run into one of the trap rooms, and then people have had to try and break them out, which obviously wastes a lot of time. So it's just keep one eye on your map at all times and just try and be aware of your position so you don't fall into that trap. The last thing I'd probably say is on the boss, just you do need to play aggressively on the boss to try and kill it in time, but just be aware that typically the boss will have a lot of very, very strong buffs and will usually kill you very easily. So make sure you use your counters as often as you can, and just try and just be aware of your surroundings and just try not to get caught out by any of the boss attacks. Typically in NGS you can get away with getting hit quite a bit, but with the buffs that these bosses have, you might only be able to take 1 or 2 hits depending on what it hits you with. So just be aware of your positioning and just make sure that you're not getting hit by too many attacks, because you do need to be aware that you do have a limited number of lives across your entire team, and you don't want to be the person who fails to do, who's the last life lost. So I think that's more or less everything regarding the actual quest. Now, the rewards you can get from this. So there is a new 9-star weapon series, called I believe they're called the Verschmelt set, and they have a crazy potency, which is 100% critical rate. So I don't know how they compare to some of the other 9 stars like the Tisa set or the 8-star Neos Australian set, but they do seem to drop from this quest, but they are quite rare drops. I personally haven't had one yet. By doing this quest though, you will get an item called Growthment, and the Growthment can be exchanged at the item exchange shop, and in that shop you can actually buy the Verschmelt weapons. I believe it's 50 Growthment for one. You can also get one with Fixer on it as well for about 300 Growthment. So even if you don't get it as a reward through the quest, you can get it elsewhere as well by just playing the quest over and over again. You can also get the new Octo armor from the Growthment shop as well. I'm going to assume it probably drops in the quest as well, but I haven't seen it drop personally. Apart from that, it's, there's not a whole lot in the way of drops, but I have seen a few Neos Australian. Actually, sorry, not Neos Australian, Neos Justitian. I've seen a few of the Neos Justitian sets drop, and I've also seen a lot of capsules that they used to make the Domina capsules. So all of the Steer Note and things like that. So all of those capsules that are used to make the Domina capsules that you then use to make Halfanel, you can get those. There is also a couple of unique capsules you can get from this as well that have the LC suffix on them. And what they are is they're a capsule that gives you an ability. It's a 10% success rate, so they're slightly higher than some other capsules for success rate. And what they do is they give you a slightly weaker version of the normal ability, which might sound a bit pointless, but some of the abilities are things like Halfanel, which is obviously probably one of the most broken skills and one of the most broken abilities in the game at the moment. So you can get a slightly toned down version of that by doing this quest. So instead of the absolutely horrendous grind to try and get Halfanel capsules, you could, if you wanted to, just settle for the Halfanel LCs, which is slightly worse, but probably a lot easier to get. So there is a few reasons for doing this. It's also just it's quite fun just trying to deal with the bosses as well. I mean, some of them are completely annoying. For example, the Boujin boss, when it confuses you with every hit, is just infuriating to fight. But it is quite good to actually find something that's got some difficulty to it in NGS. And hopefully we're going to continue with that with the next boss that we're getting in a few days as well. So I think I'll call the video there for now. If you've got any questions at all about the Leciel quest, just leave them in the comments below. I am still kind of learning it myself. I'm learning a little bit more every time I do it. But I hope this gives you an idea of how the basics work at least. And if you've got any questions, just leave them in the comments. I'll try and answer what I can. And hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video.